Welcome to episode 7 in July, when we honor our habit to become involved. July's habit is to become involved and be of service. July's color is Patriot Red, and July's goal, to create a world of abundance by getting up off your buns and starting to dance. Abundance. It's not enough to be evolved if you're not involved. There's no better time for applied enlightenment. Consider the risks that America's founders took that July long ago. What are you willing to risk to stand up for the world we know is possible? How will you involve yourself? Well, we're following up on June's habit of reaching higher. July is where the karma meets the road. In July, Americans celebrate Independence Day, honoring those courageous individuals who risked their lives and fortunes to bring the idea of inalienable sovereign rights to the world. Did you know, for example, that Ho Chi Minh, who we fought against in the Vietnam War, was an admirer of Thomas Jefferson and hoped that the United States would support his country in their revolution? Well, consider that America's founders were in a minority and they risked hanging if they failed. So, what are you willing to risk to stand up for the world you know is possible? What are your talents and gifts that are needed out there? What are you waiting for? Remember, being involved is not the same as being entangled. When your actions spring from your purpose and desire to promote intentional mutual benefit, involved and evolved become one and the same. What are you waiting for? Hi, I'm Steve Bhaerman, and welcome to July, the 7th month of the year, where we focus on becoming involved and seeing ourselves not as the center of everything, but as a contextual member of our larger global community. In July, you can be inspired to become involved as our founding fathers did when they risked everything to be free of domination. Now, we love our Bill of Rights and are still fighting for equal rights for all Americans. However, have you ever wondered what our country would be like today if the founders had also included a Bill of Responsibilities? Reminds me of President Kennedy's very famous quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." This is the spirit in which the 12 Habits Path enters July, the month to become involved. Well, as you learned in our introductory episode, that the 12 Habits is the path to mutual enlightenment, this path is a new way to actually put our desire for unity consciousness and intentional evolution into real practice. We can grow spiritually while at the same time, in practicing these habits in real life, we do what Bruce Lipton calls for. We create heaven on earth, which is why he endorses the path of unity. Every step we take in practicing these habits brings heaven to our space. Heaven's the place to start from if you want to get there. I have found these habits are the most enjoyable, organized way to be able to put evolution into practice because we're all doing it together in a coherent way. And now I'd like to introduce my cohort in this webinar, the creator of the 12 Habits Path to Intentional Evolution, Elaine Parke. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you, Steve. I'm glad to be involved with you today and doing this delightful discussion back and forth about a wonderful topic that we all need to take seriously to become involved.
Thanks, Elaine. January's habit is to help others, and now July's habit is to become involved. How are these two different, and why are they different?
Well, clearly you've noticed that there's a similarity. I mean, there can't be too much giving. So technically, we have 2 months dedicated to giving, but the difference between helping others in January and become involved in July is when we speak about becoming involved, we're thinking about more of a commitment. January, help others, is a spontaneous kind of outreach. It's actually being aware, like the man I spoke of, the homeless man that gave me the pencil, that was aware of my search for a pencil that day and handed me a pencil. I mean, that's That's helping others. That's spontaneous. That's knowing you got a sick neighbor down the street. That's helping others. July is different because July involves making a commitment to something. I mean, finding a need in your community, matching it with something you enjoy. If you enjoy reading, why not read to children? In the book, the 12 Habits of Unity, there's a half a page reading for each day with a little thought and some quotes. But at the end of each of those readings, there's a little what I call an action piece. And in July, for instance, here's a couple of the action pieces. Participate in a block watch or neighborhood safety program. Become involved with a community service organization like Kiwanis or Rotary. And here's one, and I'm going to tell you a story about this one. On July 3rd, the reading says, the end of the reading, the action suggestion says, take care of children for a young neighbor mother who needs a few hours to herself. Well, when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I had what I called the Woodchuck Club. On Saturday mornings, for 25 cents, I invited young mothers in the neighborhood to send their children over to our basement. Of course, I was too young to be a babysitter, but my parents were home, so it was safe. And I did little activities with little kids in the neighborhood for a few hours on Saturday morning to give their parents a chance to do something, not have, to give the, maybe I was, I'm dating myself. They didn't have Saturday morning cartoons. They came to the Woodchuck Club. So that was something that I did way back when I was 8 or 9 years old. Looking at the faces around you. There's always something that can be done. But in July, it's a matter of becoming involved.
Oh, the Woodchuck Club. It reminds me, maybe the idea came from, remember Donald Duck's nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie? They had the junior woodchuck. So what a thing to do as a kid. Another question, Elaine. I heard you say that our founding fathers have something to do with why we're so divided today. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, the key to the 12 Habits of Unity is to not be controversial. That being said, I might have a little bit of a controversial opinion here, but I think our forefathers are a little bit to blame for the fact that we are such a egocentric, focusing on individual rights society. Now you have to understand their frame of mind. They were revolutionaries. They were pulling apart from the tyranny, the taxing and the tyranny and the control that England had over us as a colony. And so their frame of mind was all about the rights that we deserved here in this colony and why we wanted to throw off England and the taxes from England and take control of our own destiny. So in that frame of mind, they were very, very focused on our rights as citizens in this new colony, but they really, and they did a wonderful job of designing our government, the 3 forms of government that are all, balancing each other. But what they didn't really think through was the fact that in order to be a member of a democracy where everyone matters, it takes a lot more responsibility on the part of the people in a democracy, more than just, all we really have to do, according to the government, is vote and obey the laws. But if they had written a Bill of Responsibilities, which is that, for instance, you do your very best to take care of yourself in your own life. We don't like big government, but a lot of times big government is stepping in and taking the place of what neighbors and friends could do for people because, it's not being done that much anymore. So I think that had our forefathers balanced the Bill of Rights with a Bill of Responsibilities, and we as citizens of a democracy had a lot stronger idea of what being a member of a democratic society is all about and what our responsibilities are, we might not have the fights over rights and the unbalanced focus on individualism rather than the focus on unity and what we have in common that we do today. Actually, President Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think every American probably knows that and loves that line, but have we actually acted on it? more than likely not, or at least not enough.
You know, the Declaration of Independence really states that the sovereign of this country, this is a very radical thing, by the way. Prior to Declaration of Independence, the only way that humans got rights in our Western civilization was when the king granted the rights. But the Declaration essentially echoed what the indigenous people were saying, that we have the right to life, liberty, and happiness, the same right as the grass has to grow. It's a natural right that doesn't need to be given to us. And so the promise of the Declaration of Independence, as Benjamin Franklin said when they ratified the Constitution, what are we creating here? We're creating a republic if we can keep it. And so part of keeping it is for us as individuals to not, as we've done, abdicate the sovereignty and give it over to those who we think know better, those who are already in government. And consequently, we've relied on our government to do a lot for us, where we can actually maybe do better by cooperating on our own above and beyond the political system. Imagine this. Now, in 1964, I believe it was, that's when Lyndon Johnson first launched the war on poverty. And the joke since then has been, the war on poverty is over, all the poor people have surrendered. Okay, so we've got that joke. In those almost 60 years, we have spent $23 trillion on the war on poverty. But in the process, we've supported a lot of poverty workers, but we really haven't given poor people the agency to actually develop their independence and responsibility to, instead of welfare, maybe wealthfare, where people learn how to become fairly wealthy and wealthy fairly. Okay? So I think it's very important that we recognize that all of these things we would like our government to do for us, recognize that we have had this responsibility as a collective, we the people, and we've allowed that responsibility to slip away until now. So that's why July is so important, because it's the invitation to take on this new responsibility of getting involved, beyond your world and beyond your comfort zone. Okay. So Elaine, how can people take on this new responsibility to get involved?
I think a key to becoming involved is to get rid of the number one excuse, and this is a survey study that I saw once, which is not enough time. So that's the number one reason why people say they're not involved. So I think the first step to take is decide that you do want some part of your day to be meaningful. As I said, the difference between January's habit to help others and July's habit to become involved is a matter of commitment. In the beginning, when Habitat Humanity first became very popular, I was kind of intrigued by the idea, because so all these people were like spending months and months and months working together, and they were just building a house for one person. And again, my behavior modification marketing frame of mind thinking, all these people are just building one house. But what I realized about Habitat for Humanity is that when you become involved, you do become a part of a community that's doing something together. So that's the unique shared practice that you have with the community that you become involved with, wherever you choose to, whether it's a soup kitchen nearby or the Red Cross like me as a teenager, wherever you choose to make a commitment to become involved, that is going to create a new circle of friends, a new community for you. And again, just like in January, when you help others, you feel good. You're creating another way to uplift yourself and not only give back to your community, but give to yourself.
Talk about Habitat for Humanity. I think in this whole process, we are inhabiting new habits so that we actually create this new habitat. There's a wonderful story. Again, one of the ways we really support ourselves in becoming more involved is recognizing the difference that it makes. There is a project in Sri Lanka called Sarvodaya that's been going on for more than 60 years. Dr. Aryaratne, who was a follower of Gandhi, he's still alive, he's 91 or 92 now. He decided that he was going to take this idea of creating a habitat where people are serving one another. So based on Gandhi's principles, Dr. Aryaratne, or Dr. Ari as he's been known, created this network of village economies in Sri Lanka, very impoverished country. And this was really people creating these village economies, supporting one another, a network of local village economies that helped the developing society build an infrastructure from the grassroots up. It's come to include 15,000 villages where people have focused on building food networks, food systems, supporting one another, and their slogan has been, "We build the road and the road builds us." In other words, in the process of becoming involved, it's a spiritual path that has physical manifestations. And one of the physical manifestations is enhancing our own lives and well-being. During the recent crisis in Sri Lanka, Sarvodaya was a saving grace because what they did, there was a food shortage, corruption in the government, and so what they did was they had all of the people in their villages bring all the surplus food and all the grown food and all their little seeds to the early child care centers, and all the food was put together, pooled, and everyone was fed from these centers, particularly to the young children. So even though the rest of the society was falling apart, this little grassroots consortium of 15,000 villages of people being involved were actually able to make sure that everyone in Sri Lanka was fed. So now the question is, how can weaving together the inner work and the outer work build a better world and better individuals to populate it?
Well, there have been a lot of studies that show that less than 20% of Americans volunteer at all. Imagine how much less government we'd need and how much more supported and cared about and connected we'd feel as a country if a much higher percent of Americans found the time to volunteer. So the problem is not simply bad people who do wrong, but good people who do nothing. And in one form or another, I think most of us have heard that. Eldridge Cleaver said, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And that's what makes Become Involved such an important month, and why everyone should think about carving out some of their time in their day or their week, or even if they find something they can do once a month, whatever it is, make a regular commitment to become involved in some way in making the world a little better around you.
Elaine, why don't you give me your favorite examples of people becoming involved?
Well, it's halfway through the 12 Habits of Unity's July, and giving me a chance to tell everybody my very favorite story of all the 30 years that I spent. It happened actually in Somerset. They had a Special Olympics. Somerset is set in the mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania, and every year they had a Special Olympics there. And the Special Olympics was held in February, when the month is you count. So the story I'm going to tell you was inspired by you count, but what really happened was Become Involved, which is why I'm telling it now. So as usual, there were all these committees all over the community that were the Special Olympics committees that were doing everything. And there was a group of the popular, well-known teenagers that always did everything, that were the ones that were asked to be, to help with the Special Olympics. And in one of the teacher meetings, the teachers brought up, this is the month to become involved. We would like every child I mean, wouldn't it be great if somehow every child in this entire county could somehow feel like they're a part of the Special Olympics? So, nobody could figure out. And then all of a sudden, a teacher in the room, you could just see the light bulb go off in her head. And she said, I have a great idea. Why don't we have every child in the entire Somerset school system write a special letter of welcome to the Special Olympians? So in the end of December or early January, sometime before the event, the assignment went out to every English classroom in the whole school district. Kids wrote letters of welcome to the Special Olympians. The art classes actually decorated the envelopes with the names of the Special Olympians. And part of the opening ceremony of the event in Somerset that day was, as each Special Olympian walked past and was announced as a part of the Special Olympics, they were handed a big decorated envelope all full of letters from children throughout the entire county of Somerset. And what was really cool was that the attendance at the event was like double or triple what it normally was, because obviously the parents and the families of the kids that had written the letters attended, which they probably normally would never have done. They were running around looking for the Special Olympians that their child who might have gotten a letter from their child. I mean, it just turned into the most wonderful day on earth, and a day I'll never forget, because that entire community benefited. Every man, woman, and child in that community benefited from the fact that they responded. That school district insisted that every child felt a part of that event. And so the whole community became involved. I love that story. So I'm going to ask you a question, Steve. You've been asking me most of the questions, and I've been letting you get away with it, but I'm going to become involved and ask you a question. Why do you think people do not get involved?
You got me. Well, I was supposed to ask you the tough questions. Well, I think these days, I would have to chalk it up primarily to people being busy. So many people are minding their own busyness. It used to be, imagine when we were kids back in the 50s and 60s, even the 70s, a family used to be able to get by on one income, buy a home and appliances, send the kids to college, mother stayed home, and there was a lot of spacious time. Now, it's not uncommon for a couple to have 3 jobs between them and still not enough to make ends meet. I remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I had plenty of time to do all my work and volunteer at the food co-op, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, first of all, we have to recognize that life has become more stressful. But as Elaine suggested earlier, we create the space for ourselves by actually making it part of our life to become involved on a larger scale. I think we can get inspired by courageous people who have had something at stake, who getting involved was dangerous for them. I think about the founders of the United States as an example. Their fortune, their well-being, their lives, you're taking a bold risk. And then consider what whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg or Edward Snowden have had at stake and risk. And now consider we now have a very relentless cancel culture, cancel society that's been quelling free speech instead of engaging with ideas that challenge the status quo. And so one way of becoming involved is to lovingly and loudly speak up and speak out. Be courageous. Be courageous. Don't be afraid to not speak up. We're living at a time when it's very, very easy for people to send messages, to hit send, and then go, uh-oh, I hit send. I dehumanized somebody. So right now, we are coming out of this phase. We're showing our faces again, right? We have the opportunity to meet face-to-face, heart-to-heart, and anytime we have the opportunity to step off the battlefield and stay present, take that. If you don't like the division and separation, become involved with Reunion. There are 2 organizations I can think of, Braver Angels, Living Room Conversations, that bring people together across political divides and so on, so that they can learn each other's stories, communicate face-to-face, and rehumanize one another. These are life-changing aspects of getting involved. Now, a lot of people are isolated. This is a time of isolation and alienation. Many years ago, before I met my wife, Trudy, I co-authored a book with a psychologist called Friends and Lovers, How to Meet the People You Want to Meet. And what we discovered, this is back before computer dating or the internet or anything like that. We meet the people we want to meet by engaging in those things that nourish our heart. We're more likely to meet people who will love us or like us for being who we are when we're actually being who we are. Here's my favorite story. This happened several years ago of the power of involvement. You've probably heard the story. There were some bathers caught in a riptide off the coast of Florida. And what happened was the people on the shore, on the sand, saw that. They made a human chain to reach those people and bring them to safety. Now, guaranteed, not one of the people in this human chain turns to somebody else and says, "Hey, are you a Democrat or a Republican?" Instead of pulling each other apart in a tug of war, they were all pulling together in a tug of peace. So, for July, where can we find a tug of peace where we can pull together with other people to create intentional mutual benefit? Elaine, I know you've been involved with a worldwide organization that makes it its business to be involved, the Rotary Club. Tell us more.
Yes, Rotary Club, Steve. I'm actually a third generation Rotarian, and I've been a Rotarian for about 30 years because the Pittsburgh Rotary Club heard about what I was doing, and they were looking for a youth project to sponsor to bring into the Pittsburgh city schools. So they invited me in, and I, of course, getting involved with Rotary begins with giving them a talk about whatever it is you do. And after that, they voted to make the 12 Habits one of their youth projects. So that summer was the 100th conference, the 100th anniversary of Rotary, and the 100th conference in Chicago. And my program was selected to be at the booth for new ideas around the world. And a delegation from Rwanda, the country from Rwanda, walked by the booth, and they were looking for a program to bring to Rwanda to help their children never, ever have war again. Many of you, I'm sure everyone who's listening to this is aware that in 1994, over a 90-day period, actually, a genocide in Rwanda killed almost 1 million people. So this group was looking for, and they saw that the colors and the monthly, and they thought, it translated, it crossed barriers of language because the colors cross language barriers. And so they invited me to Rwanda to train all of the headmasters from all of the schools of Rwanda. I was working with the Republic of Rwanda, something called the NURC, which is the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, and obviously with Rotary. And part of my job when I was there was actually to speak to the 4 Rotary clubs that were there in Rwanda. Actually, speaking to one of the Rotary clubs was the only time in the 3 weeks I was there that I was ever in a westernized section of the capital of Kigali. The rest of the time I was in Rwanda, I was living as any Rwandan would, in a hotel maybe, but a hotel that a Rwandan would live in. It was quite lovely. So I could go on and on. I could take a whole section talking about Rotary, and maybe at some point I'll talk about everything that I know and everything that happened in Rwanda. But to this day, the 12 Habits in Rwanda is active in some sections of the country. Their national motto is never again. And clearly, if anybody's studied much about Rwanda, of the sub-Saharan African countries, they're doing quite well. And I like to think that somewhere behind the scenes, just a little bit, the fact that they're young people were introduced to the idea of the 12 Habits and introduced to the behaviors that result in a peaceful society. And I'm very proud to have done that and very honored to have been able to do that. And yes, it's an example of what Rotary International does everywhere, all over the world. And I was blessed to be part of just one of their projects.
Wow, what an inspiring story. What an inspiring story to be able to bring these habits to a school system in Pittsburgh and then go across the world to a country that's been really torn apart by genocide and mutual hatred and begin to help them reweave their world. So here we are. It's the month of July, and I'm hoping that all of you watching will become peer participants. Go to our website, go to our Facebook group, share ways that you are becoming involved this month, share some stories, be inspired by what other people are doing. The practice for this month of July, ask yourself, is there a way you know you can be helpful? Is there an area where you could be involved, and yet, until now, you've put up a barrier of, I'm not getting involved? Are there special skills you have that you can apply to be involved? Is there a way that you can inform a divisive political issue by not being on the battlefield? If so, Uncle Swami needs you.